Gaston Lamar let out a little sigh. His white moustache quivered as he pushed his gold-rimmed glasses further up the bridge of his nose. From his seat in the corner, he could see her smiling at him. Such an exquisite smile it was. He knew the smile was for him because her eyes followed him around the room. Of course, everyone said her eyes followed them around the room, but only Gaston knew the truth. Her eyes shifted every time he changed position. She never took them off him. He sighed again. He would miss her. He had worked in the Louvre Museum since 1950, and 24 years of loyal service had taught him to revere and love every painting, sculpture, and artifact in the place. They were like family. Artistically, he preferred some to others. Some he didn't particularly care for at all, but they were all his children, and it felt like a personal affront when a visitor showed signs of disrespect. Take that man last Friday, for example. He'd run his hand down the thighs of the three Graces, and when Gaston, passing through, had told him off, he'd argued that it was part of art appreciation. Huh! Art appreciation, my foot! It would be a fine thing if everyone did that. Soon they'd have no thighs at all. He looked back at the painting and wondered what her thighs were like, and immediately felt ashamed. Now it was he who was showing disrespect because she was special. Very special. He took off his uniform cap, smoothed his sparse white hair, and smiled at her as a group of camera-bedecked Japanese tourists was herded into the room. That's right, he thought. She was off on that tour to Japan and Russia next week, and when she comes back they're going to place her behind some special security glass, so of course they won't need a permanent bodyguard. It was the obvious time for Gaston to be invited to take his retirement, but it hurt all the same. Sighing again, he hoisted himself up and made his way over to the crowd, just to make sure that no one tried to reach out and touch her. She met his eyes again, obviously serene in the knowledge that while he was there no harm could come to her. But who would look after her so devotedly after he had gone? Retirement was one thing, but leaving her would be like dying. Convincing reproductions had been made with the latest laser equipment. It would be hard for an art expert to see the difference at a distance, but to Gaston the original from any distance radiated a kind of energy that was hard to describe. In fact, he had never tried, as he knew he would be taken for an old fool if he had. It wasn't just a painting. It was a living presence, and Gaston wasn't sure he could survive without it. True, he could come in here and visit her every day if he wanted to, but never again would they have those peaceful minutes alone, in the morning before the doors opened and the sound of the echoing voices, getting ever closer, would herald the arrival of the gaping hordes. And what about those privileged moments in the evening, when he wished her good night before the alarms were set? Never again. On his last medical check-up, they had discovered that his blood pressure was too high, and they had given him a gentle warning about looking after his heart, whatever that was supposed to mean. But he hadn't cared, because he knew that she always had a calming effect on him. He felt happy and serene just to be there, in his corner, in her presence, and that alone had to be good for his health. But now, on his last day, he felt a deep, empty cavern in the pit of his stomach, like an icy wave invading his body. The only other time he could remember having felt like this was when he kissed his mother goodbye on the first day at his boarding school. As he had watched her trim figure disappearing through the gates, he somehow knew that he would never see her again, and everything had misted over, and he thought he would suffocate. A large tear rolled down his cheeks, and he realized he was no longer at boarding school, but in the Louvre Museum, where a small girl in a brown dress was staring up at him, swinging a blue teddy bear. "Ahem," Gaston coughed, and pretending to blow his nose, deftly brushed the tear away. He took off his glasses and polished them as if they were responsible for his watering eyes, and, putting them on again, stared back down at the little girl. Her dark hair hung down in small ringlets, which brushed her bare shoulders and the intricate smocking on her brown summer dress. She smiled at him so sweetly it made his heart leap. There was something so familiar about her. The tenderness in her expression seemed to warm his soul strangely, and he watched her in awe as she rejoined the group of school children as they scuffled apathetically through the rooms. The afternoon dragged on, and Gaston's agony was aggravated by a sudden influx of American tourists. It was as if a circus had accidentally arrived in these hallowed halls on their way to a performance. They were all over the place in their bulging, fluorescent green Bermuda shorts that clashed with scant pinks and mauves as they craned their necks and glared at her. As soon as they had moved on, a kaleidoscope of young people followed in nylon day-glow jackets, flapping in and out like exotic butterflies as their sneakers squeaked across the polished wooden floors. Guided tours succeeded each other all afternoon, shuffling through the gallery, chatting in a multitude of languages as if someone were tuning a radio on a short-wave band, and all the time Gaston could only think of the loneliness that lay ahead. The very idea of the long, meaningless, drawn-out days without her company made him panic, and although he looked over in her direction for comfort, he couldn't even see her frame for the huge crowd around her. There were too many people for comfort, so he started to push through the human wall and was just about to raise his voice to break up the crowd when a small hand slipped into his. It was the little girl with the blue teddy bear. He allowed her to pull him away. She laughed and held the teddy bear up to him. He took it from her, touched by the offering, and pretended to look at it with interest. When he looked down again, the little girl had gone, and the crowd had dispersed, and then the bell went to announce the closing of the museum. A few latecomers hurried through, faster than they would have liked, anxious to be out before being told to go. And then there was no one left but the two of them, Gaston and Mona, comme toujours. He stood there, clutching the blue teddy bear, staring at her. His brain was in a turmoil, torn between a mounting panic that made it hard to breathe and a strange serenity that kept his feet rooted to the floor. Time seemed to stand still, until the sound of jangling keys broke his trance, and he turned to see young Jean-Pierre striding through the gallery. "Well, this is it, eh, Monsieur Gaston? La belle vie from now on, I suppose. Bet you'll be glad to be your own master after all these years. What is it, 20 years now?" 24, mumbled Gaston. Jean-Pierre hadn't been born when Gaston had first started working at the museum. "She'll miss you," the young man said, nodding his head towards the painting. "Not as much as I'll miss her," he replied, a lump rising in his throat. "What have you got there?" asked Jean-Pierre, waving the keys at the bear. "Some poor kid will be missing that this evening, I bet. Better drop it in at the main desk before you leave." He patted Gaston on the shoulder. "Well, see you in the foyer later, and we'll go for that drink. Little celebration, eh?" The sound of Jean-Pierre's keys faded into the otherwise silent depths of the museum, and Gaston covered his mouth with a trembling hand. Great tears welled up and spilled down his cheeks as he walked towards her. He wanted to give her a kiss before he left. Just one kiss. Not on the mouth, of course, not on that mouth. No, just on the hand. He was standing in front of her now, looking into those slightly hooded eyes. As he bent towards her hand, it moved. Very slightly at first, so he couldn't be sure he had seen it. But then, suddenly, there was a sound like rushing wind. The protective glass started to ripple like disturbed water, and the hand gently passed through it and stroked his cheek. brushing away the tears. His heart was pounding in his chest now as he looked up at her face. The wind sound was strong now, and he found it hard to stand, but as he felt himself going, her strong arms gathered him up and drew him into the painting with her. He put his arms around her neck and rested his head on her breast while she rocked him to sleep like a child. Gaston dropped the blue teddy bear and it fell into her lap. Jean-Pierre stood sadly, shaking his head after the ambulance men had taken Gaston away. He watched the cleaning staff as they finished sweeping the parquet, ready for tomorrow, as if nothing had happened. Fancy him dying of a heart attack like that on his last day. Pauvre Gaston. Didn't even have time to take advantage of his retirement. Oh, well, c'est la vie, he thought, giving a final glance over the spotless floor before handing in his keys. At midnight, the alarms in the Louvre Museum went off. From the control room it indicated that it came from the Salle des États, where the Mona Lisa was exhibited. But scrutiny on the closed-circuit monitor showed that nothing was visible. Yet something must have touched the floor to set off the alarm. It would have to be investigated. The two night guards reluctantly made their way back up to the salle. But could find nothing suspicious. Only a small blue teddy bear lying just under the painting of the Mona Lisa.